In the Hollywood film 300, warrior king Leonidas is heard dismissing the Athenians as philosophers and boy lovers. This image is not entirely fictional, as it has been reinforced by many of the most important authors of Greek antiquity. Plato, arguably the most important philosopher of ancient Greece proper, repeatedly presents the main character of his dialogues, Socrates, as a love-mad philosopher who pursues young boys at least as much as he pursues knowledge. In contrast to the Athenians, the Spartans were always presented as the harsh realists, tough beyond compare and masculine without parallel. Only that what is often forgotten is that had King Leonidas lived for another century, he would be forced to eat his own words about the decadence of boy love, as Sparta's armies would be defeated decisively and for the first and last time in their history by another 300, the Sacred Band of Thebes, composed of 150 homosexual couples, an elite infantry, the best of its time, and one that Plato called an army of lovers. Thebes had a long-standing tradition of homosexuality, and a local legend focused on the intimate relationship between Hercules and his companion Iolaus, while a shrine was built to their honor where lovers took pledges of mutual devotion. The city's trouble with Sparta began after the crushing defeat of Athens at the end of the Peloponnesian War. As Sparta emerged victorious, it began to export its type of government, a conservative oligarchy, to the city-states that had come under its influence. Among them was Thebes, where the Spartans toppled the democratic government and exiled all of its leaders. 4 years later, however, they would return, taking back their city by expelling the Spartans, inevitably setting themselves on a collision course with the best military machine of the ancient world. And it was during this crucial moment in their history that Gorgidas, a Theban general, created the Ieros Lochos, the Sacred Band of Thebes. Like the Spartan elites that fought against the Persians at Thermopylae, the Sacred Band would be composed by 300 men, but more specifically, 150 homosexual pairs. Gorgidas was killed shortly after founding the Sacred Band, but was quickly succeeded by Pelopidas, one of the Democrats who had led the takeover of their city from the Spartan rule. Initially, the Sacred Band showed great promise on the battlefield, but despite their exceptional training, Thebans were still reluctant to challenge the Spartans head-on. In 375 BC, however, and while they were out in the field, they ran into a Spartan unit near the city of Thegira. The Spartans had such a terrifying reputation that many of their battles were won by the immediate surrender of their enemies. And upon seeing their lines, a frightened soldier told Pelopidas they had just fallen into the enemy's hands. But this Theban commander was different, and answering back to the soldier, he said, "Why not them to our hands?" making the unprecedented decision to charge. And for the first time in their history, the Spartans were routed. This unexpected victory sent shockwaves throughout Greece. But while it had successfully proved that Spartans bled like old men, it was far from decisive, and Thebes was now in even greater peril than before. Pelopidas' victory was enough to seal his name in history, but it's unlikely that he would be able to repeat his achievement against the full Spartan regiment, especially one that would never make the same mistake of underestimating its enemy. Luckily for him, Thebes had a seemingly inexhaustible deposit of good men, and one rose to Pelopidas' help. His name was Epaminondas, an eccentric soldier philosopher, disciple of the mystico-scientific Pythagorean school, a man whose courage was only outmatched by his mind. Epaminondas was the first to devise a new tactical maneuver by which the left flank of his phalanx was disproportionately stronger than the right, attacking, as it were, obliquely, allowing his lines to score a quick victory over half of their enemy, throwing them off balance and into confusion. Pelopidas, still in charge of the Sacred Band, held the center, and as the Spartan lines folded on the left, he charged straight ahead, smashing into their core, commanded by one of their two kings, who was killed on sight. The Spartans were routed, and the battle ended their military supremacy that they had enjoyed for half a millennia, and since the first Indo-European tribes had descended from the north with their spears of iron. While the defeat of the Spartans was unexpected, the example of the Sacred Band was not entirely new to Greek culture, because unlike our own atomized world, during the height of ancient Greece, it was well understood that true political freedom rested on the formation of strong personal bonds between its citizens, a bond they called philia, which sadly translates into friendship today, but was initially part of a small vocabulary of words that Greeks used to express love. This philia, so unique amongst the free men of ancient Greek city-states, did not imply homosexuality by necessity, but rather homosexuality was but one expression, a subset, if you will, of a much deeper and larger concept, the link between freedom and the loving bonds that form between the citizens that defended with their lives. In their political essays, both Plato and Aristotle, as well as Xenophon, observed how tyranny always tried to subvert the formation of such bonds, breaking society apart into its basic component, the individual. So, in the context of Greek culture, the Sacred Band of Thebes that won freedom from Spartan rule was only an exaggerated case of a much broader and much more familiar concept. A concept, no less, that is known to us through its etymological connection between the words freedom and friend. After Sparta's defeat, Thebes emerged as the dominant power of the Greek world. But unlike their predecessor, its leaders would never attempt to impose their own rule on the free city-states that composed ancient Greece, allowing them to continue in full independence. But just as the city of Thebes and its band of lovers were showing promise as the new leaders of Greece, a new power began rising from the north, a power that would soon conquer not only the Greek, but the entire known world, the Kingdom of Macedonia. Much has been written about Philip and his son Alexander, who led the Greek armies into the Persian heartland and united the ancient world for perhaps the first time in its history. What is far less known, however, is that Philip, years before he succeeded in rising to the Macedonian throne, was held captive in battle and sent as a hostage to Thebes, where he spent his formative years. In a surprising turn of events worthy of a Greek tragedy, Philip became a lover of no other than Pelopidas, the leader of the Sacred Band, from whom he received military training, the same training he would use years later to lead its army against Thebes and annihilate the Sacred Band forever. This would happen almost 30 years later, long after Pelopidas had died in battle. Little is known about the Battle of Cheronia that happened in 338 BC, but Philip, using his superior cavalry and the newly developed sarissa long spear, routed the enemy lines. The Sacred Band, the army of lovers that Philip knew so intimately, resisted his advance. Vastly outnumbered, they denied to surrender and were killed to the last man. Legend has it that once Philip saw the bodies of the band's soldiers, he wept in front of his men and said, "May any man perish who even implies that any of these men ever did anything disgraceful." And he was right, because for their short existence, the Sacred Band was the best disciplined and most effective phalanx in the history of Greece, defeating the Spartans not once but twice, while validating the deeply held belief that intimate personal relationships are the ultimate guarantee of freedom. Many centuries later, and just a few short years before the Greek War of Independence, a British architect discovered by accident a marble statue of a lion, which he recognized from ancient sources to be the landmark for the tomb of the 300 men that made up the Sacred Band during its last stand. When the pedestal was damaged during the war, numerous shields were discovered with the names inscribed on them. These were the names of the soldiers who preferred death to the shame they would feel by looking at the face of the man they held as most important, standing in line in full armor right next to them, their lover.